Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first video for week 3. We're in week 3 now. And this week we're talking about continuous probability distributions. So let's start with properties of all continuous probability distributions. The graph of a continuous probability distribution is usually a curve. So up to now, we've been looking at discrete data, which we saw represented in boxes. Now we're looking at smooth curves. The probability of that continuous probability distribution is represented by the area under that curve. So you can see in the picture on the right, we have an area between A and B marked on the axis, and that shaded in area represents the probability that the outcome X is somewhere between A and B. The curve is called a probability density function, and we usually represent that probability density function with the notation f of x. You've probably seen that function notation before in a prior math class. So f of x is the function that corresponds to the graph. F of x is that curve. We are going to focus on cumulative distribution functions. The area under the curve is given by a different function called the cumulative distribution function, or CDF. We've seen that before, that CDF notation, when we talked about the binomial distribution last week. So cumulative distribution functions calculate the area under the curve, which is the probability that we're interested in. For specifically continuous cumulative distribution functions, the outcomes are measured and not counted. The total area under the curve should be equal to 1 because we know that the sum of all probabilities adds up to 1. And in this case, probability is found for a range of values instead of for a single value. So when we're talking about continuous probability functions, we're always using CDF, not PDF. Even if the calculator has a PDF in there, we don't want to use it for continuous functions. We're starting to see probability notation. So P, A less than X less than B is the notation we use for the probability that X is in the interval between A and B. For continuous probability functions, the probability for X equals a value is always 0. And that's because when using these cumulative distribution functions to calculate area, there isn't any area beneath a single point on the curve. A line doesn't have any area because it has effectively no width. So we're never going to be calculating probabilities for a specific outcome. It's always going to be a range of outcomes. That also means that the probability that X is between A and B inclusive, so these little symbols mean less than or equal to, is the same as the less than, because the equal to part is 0. So having the equal to part there doesn't add anything to the answer numerically. So the less thans or the less thans and or equals tos are treated the exact same way when we learn how to calculate probability. So we know from previous math class, we know from high school, from junior high, we can use geometry to find the area under a line. We know how to find the areas of squares and rectangles and triangles. The question is, how do we do this for curves? It turns out there is a way to do this using something called an integral. And an integral is the process that they use to create that cumulative distribution function. Integrals are something that are covered in calculus, and that type of math is how, again, CDF functions are calculated. I'm not expecting you to know how to do calculus. It is not a prerequisite for this course. Most of you will probably never need to know how to do that. So we're going to bypass all of the complicated background math that comes from taking a probability distribution and turning it into a cumulative distribution function. And I'm just going to ask that you trust that I know what I'm doing and that the calculator is doing it correctly. If you're interested in knowing how this process works, we can talk about it during office hours, or you can shoot me an email. Otherwise, lots of hand waving this week, and I'm asking for a little bit of faith in my math abilities. Okay, if you have any questions this week, please let me know via email or text message. Again, my contact info is on Canvas. Don't wait till the last minute. I am moving this week, so Thursday and Friday are going to be a bit chaotic. So if you have a question, get it in early so that we're sure that it gets answered. Again, questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video.